Welcome to the second episode of a special series I like to call My Favorite Retro Games. So last time I talked about my favorite Nintendo games. Now let's talk about my favorite SNES games or Super Nintendo games, and why they impacted my life so much. But before I start, I have to say that growing up I really never had a Super Nintendo, but I had friends who owned one, or there was a place that I rented games and movies. But for a small price, you could play a game for like an hour or so, and me and a friend of mine would hop on the bus, go there, and hang out and play games. And this is where I got my taste of NES and SNES games, so let's start. Okay, so back in the first episode, I mentioned one of the first cartridges I ever owned was the dual cartridge that had Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt on it. And when the Super Nintendo first released to the US, it came with my other favorite game, Super Mario World, which brings us to the first game, Super Mario World. This game brought a whole new way of playing Super Mario to me. After years of playing Super Mario Bros. 3, and finally getting a chance to play Super Mario World was a treat. One of the reasons I fell in love with this game was the way it was played. To me, it was like playing a souped-up version of Super Mario Bros. 3, with better graphics and unique gameplay. The whole concept of introducing Yoshi was awesome. Looking back on it now, Yoshi reminds me of taming a Chocoboro in the old Final Fantasy games. But instead of trying to tame it, all you had to do was hit a box, out comes an egg, and he hatched, and you could ride him. Yoshi himself was one of my favorite features in this game. Besides the ability to ride him, he also ate fruit. But he would eat enemies and spit them out to use their powers, sort of like Kirby. Super Mario Kart is one of those racing games I fell in love with. The whole idea of racing go-karts, but with the ability to collect power-ups. Now some gave you some speed, but the ones I really loved were the ones where you could take out the people ahead of you. You could play this by yourself or race against the bots. But for the true experience for this game, it's more fun to hook up 3 of your friends and race against each other. To me, this game paved the way for games like Blur on the Xbox 360. So last time I had mentioned that the original Legend of Zelda was one of my favorite Nintendo games. Well, that didn't end with NES. My next favorite Super Nintendo game is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Now, this is the whole new idea of an RPG game. It had a massive world to explore, and not to mention the idea of going back and forth through time. Plus, the gameplay went a step up as well. It was more of a side-scroller, with which it was a change from the original Nintendo game. And yes, I know the second one was side-scrolling, but this one you could explore different areas of the map, where in Legend of Zelda: The Adventures of Link you could only go forwards and backwards, and that was it. Earthbound is one of the most unique RPG games that I ever had the pleasure to play. Well, like I said in the last video, one of my favorite game genres is RPG or role-playing games, and Earthbound is no exception. Now, I had did a video on the history of this game a while back. If you want to see that, there will be a link in the description as well in the comments, so if you want to see that, go ahead and click those. I'll give you a brief history of it though. This is the second game in a series of games called the Mother series. So this game had the most unique storyline that it took some time with the strangest ideas of all time. One of the reasons I love this game is the fact that it was one of the few games at the time that broke the fourth wall. For those of you that don't know what that means, it's basically when the characters actually talk to the audience. A good example of this is the movie Deadpool. It broke the fourth wall all the time. And same with the comics often did as well. For those of you who, like me, got a few Nintendo Power magazines in the mail, you're graced with the strangest advertising for this game as well, a scratch and sniff pile of trash. That is because some of the enemies you had to face were exactly that, trash, sort of like the strange hidden hit indie game Undertale. Donkey Kong Country at the time was one of the best versions of the game. Instead of a basic style where you play Mario trying to rescue the girl from a giant ape, you play the ape himself, but sporting a tie. Instead of climbing up, you platformed your way through each of the levels, with some being very difficult. This game ticked two of my qualifications for games I like: fun and yet challenging. I don't like games that are incredibly hard to play, nor do I like games that are as fun as watching a rock for 24 hours. One of my favorite parts of the game is where you had to try to traverse a level shooting Donkey Kong from barrel to barrel with some degree of difficulty. This is one of those times where you had to time each of your moments just right or you'd fall to your doom. But besides all that, it was the first Donkey Kong game that had a storyline to it. And the last entry on my list is Chrono Trigger, which is one of the most unique RPG games that I ever played next to Earthbound. Square Enix, or back then Squaresoft, never disappointed me with whatever RPG game they came out with. I always played whatever they came out with, from the first Final Fantasy to any of them that come out, and still do. The storyline to Chrono Trigger is one of my favorites for an RPG. The whole idea of the choices you make in the past and what affects you in the future was something that blew my mind then. Now that concludes this episode of My Favorite Retro Games, Super Nintendo Edition. What are your favorite Super Nintendo games? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to hit a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you're notified of the next episode of My Favorite Retro Games. Again, I'm Paul, saying peace out and stay frosty.